What is a woman to you?
Someone who outwardly presents societal femininity, has breasts, wears feminine clothing, and doesn't present in a masculine way that would make me uncomfortable if they walked into a female biological restroom.
So, if someone wanted to be a trans woman and wanted to be considered as a woman and they didn't have breast, or a woman who maybe had her breast removed due to cancer, are they not a woman now? Because in your definition, they need to have breast.
I didn't say they needed to have breasts, but it is a way that I could identify them as a woman in our society, as men do not have them, correct?
Correct.
And we're using societal, sociological terms, not biological, correct? Not males. You acknowledge the word man and male as a separate word, correct? So I have won this debate.
So I think, no, you have not. So you're trying to tell me right now basically that gender and sex are different. In a sense, they are, but gender is derived from sex. You wouldn't have gender without having the sexes. I would say gender is the way the sex is played out, but that doesn't, in order to be that gender, you have to be that sex. Because there's a lot of experiences that go down that the opposite gender will never understand, and back and forth. A little girl doesn't understand.
I absolutely agree with that, but how do you address the individual circumstances with each individual sex and gender as different things, such as women and white women?
On an individual basis. You will never get anything done if you're just looking at every individual case. Obviously, there's going to be anomalies.
I understand, but I refute your point with your own logic.
You're just saying individual cases. You're not really being specific on those.
No, I just used your own logic to refute your point, though.
I don't think you did.
Because each individual woman's experience is different doesn't negate the fact that biological females, like, you know that this is a mass level college thesis debate, right?
Woman, you do realize that, right? Women all have the nature to have the same experience, right? Women are of the nature to go through the same puberty, go through a pregnancy if they choose to, and then go through menopause. That is literally the nature of what it means to be a woman and to go through those experiences, let alone the societal experiences. At the end of the day, a man will never have those, nor understand them. So yeah, individually there might be differences among the route, but they still are of the same nature to go through it all.
Would you not agree that trans women go through the same subjugation as the female population?
No, they go through something entirely different.
I didn't say it wasn't identical. I didn't say it was identical, rather. I said it was a similar subjugation.
Yeah, no, it's not. I would say partially, maybe towards the end, but at the end of the day, they have the experiences of being a man, then they are also going to be medicalized for the rest of their life. Women don't go through that. So there's some similarities where being perceived as a woman, right? Where people subconsciously go, or where they go through subconscious processes to register if it's a man or woman. So they might be like she, her, right? Those are similarities, but the overall experience, the way they think, is going to be way different. And if you want to look up The End of Gender by Deborah Soh, you can read more into that.
I mean, that does sound interesting, to be honest. Now, one point I wanted to make was that our societal construct is absolutely based on our very superficial external genitalia. You are correct. But as we advance through society and the way we interact, our societal interactions are going to produce a hyper quickening, because we never used to interact in such an immediate way, right? Like, it used to take months for people to interact with a letter. Now, you and I, who've never talked before, have had an intellectual conversation that has stimulated like almost 1,000 viewers. So if you think about the way that affects our sociological progress, it's just so much different than what we've ever based our thought processes on. And one specific point that I'd like to point out, especially within the lexicon and how quickly this is moving, is that I think young people definitively define what is cool and slang and how we communicate. The millennials have been considered young and the kids and cool for 30 years. You still have boomers referring to millennials as kids, which would define us as the generation of cool. But in reality, Gen Z is defining what's cool, or Gen A even. And we see that by having TikTok shove it in our face in the most eloquent of ways.
Right. I'm a little confused where you're going with this. But if you want to say, due to technology, things are, they transverse a lot quicker, I would agree with that. I would say a lot of what's going on right now might be a social contagion based off what people are seeing online, right? That's why we've had like a 5,000% increase in trans youth.
Would you still think it represents less than, let's say, about 2% of the population?
I mean, I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't know what population, if we're talking about the US of A, right? And we're doing 5%.
Do you think that this could be a hinge issue used by folks at the highest levels of our government and power to scapegoat a minority community?
I would say, yeah, it definitely is. Like, I will agree with you on that. I think there's a lot of things that the government's doing behind our backs that we don't pay attention to because we're so focused on social issues overall. But, that's what we're looking at. People don't want to hear about, what's in the infrastructure bill. No one even reads that thing.
I mean, I certainly do. Hey, man, I really appreciate the conversation. We don't agree, but I think we could definitely end a beer together one day. Vote for me to replace Caroline Miller in West Virginia, District House 1. Have a good night.
Wait, did you say be together?
A beer.
Oh, a beer. I was like, what? What did he just say?
No, bro, dude, I'm married. I'm married with a child. I have a son. Sorry, I'm off the table.
That threw me off for a second. I was like, oh, okay. But you have a great night.
You have a good night, dude.
I swear to God. I heard that. Oh, how's it going?
What's going on?
It's good. You agree, disagree? Or either one?
I mean, I agree with like the word, like them. You're saying trans women are trans women, but I mean, I also think that trans women are definitely women.
Okay, how so?
I mean, just going off of the fact, and I mean, I guess I'm kind of agreeing with the last guy's argument that gender is really under the umbrella of sociology, which is exactly what he was saying. It's basically how we interact with the world and how we interact with each other. Right. And how gender is really a performance, like a social construct. Like gender is something you act out every single day. Right. Like men are supposed to act this way, women are supposed to act this way, and as soon as you don't, you get kickback because you're not acting within your gender.
So correct. You're right. That is 100% correct. I would say that gender and like gender roles and stuff, they change all the time, right? In 19th century England, oh my Lord, I'm stumbling. Boys used to wear pink, right? Obviously that's changed.
Yeah.
Like, things change all the time. But at the end of the day, in order to be a man, you have to be a male. In order to be a woman, you have to be female, because those are what kind of binds it all together. Now, whether the roles change or not over time, that's up for debate, right? But you can see through all of society that that's how it's been going on. You can look at a current indigenous tribe, the Sentinelese, right? If you look at photographs of them, they have very distinct gender roles, and they've never been a part of our society. And I would question to you, how does gender even come about if you don't incorporate the sex aspect, if you say they're different?
Yeah, no, I mean, okay. I guess I'm trying to think of which point to talk about first. Well, first off, I mean, there's definitely indigenous populations that had multiple genders. Like there are different indigenous populations that definitely have multiple genders, third genders. There's still people today in different like cultures, in places that literally have words for third genders. Like transgender people, I'm sure have existed for thousands upon thousands of years. And I would also like to say that just because gender goes off of sex, and I mean, obviously it's a way for us to kind of like put people in a box. So, I mean, it makes sense that we would create gender from sex, but I don't necessarily think that that means that like where we've gotten today, I don't think that that would necessarily take away from the fact that gender still isn't tied to sex. Like, okay, I keep going back to what the last person said, but I feel like I'm just kind of re-talking his points a little bit, but I'm just putting it out there. But I mean, literally, like we have studies today, we have like fields of science that say sex and gender are different.
Right. And a lot of people keep bringing up the science today. The issue with science today is if it doesn't agree with the trans activists, it gets shut down. If you look at UCLA, they were going to look at the way the brain works when it comes to a trans person and then the counterpart and see the differences. And then it didn't agree with the trans activists, so they shut it down. So it's like, how much of today's science can you really take at face value when you have cases being shut down or scientists being silenced for disagreeing with the narrative that's currently running?
No, I mean, I don't really think it matters whether the brain of a trans person is the same as the brain of like a cisgender person. I'm more or less like talking about the fact that, like, going back to your point about gender relating to like biology, gender, although I guess we kind of got it from biology, the way that it works, gender really doesn't have anything to do with biology at all. Like a boy didn't come out with a blue shirt. You didn't come out with muscles and a six pack and being strong and not crying. Like gender really has almost nothing to do with sex at all beyond men should act like this and men are typically, typically have male genitalia. Like, I don't necessarily think that.
So then how were they created in the first place?
Wait, say that again?
How were they created in the first place?
Like how was gender created in the first place? I mean, I'm not a gender expert, but I'm saying just because it was created like that, you don't think the ending could change or it could change at any point? Because I mean, it doesn't. I guarantee you, if we all lost our memories today, we would follow the same route we currently are on. I don't think that's necessarily true at all.
Male.
I don't think that's necessarily true at all. Because I mean, think about it. Like with men, what makes men masculine? What makes men supposed to be the provider? What makes men... Say that again?
Testosterone.
I'm saying like, I'm not necessarily saying stronger, but what makes man a provider? Because he has testosterone?
Right. Testosterone is a very hefty hormone that will make you more assertive, more aggressive, stronger, and all sorts of things.
But right? I mean, a woman doesn't necessarily need testosterone to be a provider. You can still provide.
Right. You're right. But and not have testosterone. Back in the day, when we were in hunter and gathering stages, there was a reason why they had the men hunt.
But I mean, going back to that, I don't think the men were really providing for the community. Like looking back at even just like fossils, I was just reading a study that basically said men didn't really provide much for the community because hunting usually didn't like go right. Women,
no, obviously there was gathering, but I would say you should probably look into who wrote that study in the first place, because to say men didn't do anything for like provide for the community or anything like that, you have to be pretty freaking biased and not know anything about it.
No, I'm saying even hunting now, most of the time hunters don't get anything and we have guns. So what do you think that they were doing with spears? And most of the food came from like the land, plants. I mean, if you could go and kill a deer or an antelope or something, then, I guess you got to eat good. But most of the time, it wasn't coming from that.
Right.
I guess that's kind of getting into the weeds of it a bit. I just don't think that provider doesn't equate man. Provider doesn't necessarily equate male. Like I'm saying, gender really has nothing to do with what's in your pants. Like, just because you have male genitalia doesn't mean you're going to be a provider. Just because you have male genitalia doesn't mean you're going to necessarily do all these things that are characteristics of man that we've just created kind of out of thin air.
No, I
Men,
don't think it was created out of thin air. I
it
think
definitely
men
was.
actually have a drive for that via testosterone. I don't think every man becomes a provider. Obviously, that doesn't happen. You have so many countless men nowadays who rather just sit at home and play video games and rather than go out in the world. Now, we could also say testosterone nowadays is on a heavy decline. So there might be a case for that. But at the end of the day, back in the day, the gender roles weren't created out of nowhere. Whether they came back with food or not back in the day, that's aside the point. They still went out and did it, right? There's a reason why it's always men fighting the wars, because men are.
Because they literally outlawed women to fight them.
I mean, yes, I would say, yeah, you could say that, but at the same time, I would prefer, women don't go to war, because if they get, if they're pregnant, then they lose that child if they're in war. Like, there's all sorts of
Yeah,
reasons.
okay, yeah, I guess that's true, but
There's
I still
multiple
think,
reasons why they have men go out there, because men are typically expendable.
yeah, I get what you're saying, but I'm saying, like, you're kind of like, I feel like you're trying to make it work, but regardless, where we've ended up now has nothing to do with sex. You can say, yeah, testosterone makes you stronger, so you could have went out and hunted.
So
Doesn't
what about the
necessarily mean.
Sentinelese then?
You said, say that again?
The Sentinelese.
The Sentinelese?
Mm-hmm.
You're saying like the culture?
Yeah, no, the indigenous tribe that is on the Sentinel Island.
When you're saying how the men are the providers there?
Yeah. Or
I'm saying
we don't really know if they are the provider. I think, that is aside the point, whether the men are the provider or the women are the provider. I think that's a completely different topic, right? But there are gender roles. I think that's the core of the argument that we're having.
Yeah, and I'm saying that,
So you
but
can
like,
have it flip-flop, right? Where women are the provider and men are the nurturers in a sense. And
then the gender roles would look
men-
completely different, and gender would be
Right, yeah. So
performed in a
it's like I
completely
said,
different
gender
way.
roles are subject to change. I never said they weren't. But in order to be that gender, you have to be that sex. Otherwise, there's no difference, and there's no point in having gender at the same.
But
at
but
all.
I'm saying, do you see how gender really almost has nothing to do with what's in your pants? Like you just said, gender roles can change. Gender roles do change all the time. So if gender roles are changing, then that means that gender isn't necessarily staked in anything. Yeah, I mean, normally doctors look at, your genitalia or whatever, you're automatically this gender. But that doesn't necessarily even mean that, like, I feel like I keep arguing the same point and saying it over again. But I
Right,
feel like,
because
yeah,
you can't. There's only so far you can take that.
that gender doesn't really have anything
You
to do
always
with
circle
what's in
back
your
towards like
pants.
gender doesn't mean anything in your pants, but at the end of the day, if you keep following that line of thinking, it's just going to run you into a circle. There's no definitive answer to that type of thinking. When you have it like that, if you have, in order to be a man, you have to be a male. It's a category. Unfortunately, yeah, it excludes women because they're not men, right? And so that's how that goes. It's as simple as that. That's all she wrote on that one. Now, trans women or trans men are people who deal with gender dysphoria, who try to align themselves with the opposite category and alleviate their gender dysphoria. And they can identify with it, but they aren't it, because they wouldn't have had to transition. They wouldn't have had to transition their gender if there was no genders in the first place.
Yeah, but I'm saying, just because
Right.
as soon as they start identifying as that gender and start, doing gender roles, doing the things of that gender, that's kind of the point of a gender, is for you to act in that specific gender, act male, act female. That's kind of, I think, what genders were made for.
You can be perceived as that gender, but that doesn't mean you are that gender.
But
right?
no, I'm saying
Now, I'm
that's
not
the
saying
point of
like
gender,
to
is
go
just to
down
be
the road and
perceived.
you see someone who you think is trans and be outright disrespectful and be like, no, just because you weren't born a woman, I'm not going to use like they're not right pronouns or anything. But there's still a difference.
But that's the point of gender. You're perceived as a gender. Gender really has nothing to do with what's in your pants at all. It's how people perceive you. Like if I see somebody with long hair, let's say somebody with long hair from behind, can't really see them well, I might perceive that that's a woman. because gender really has nothing to do with what's in their pants. It's how you're being perceived. It's how you go through life as a specific gender. And that's why I feel like trans women are women. If they identify as a woman, if they're going through life as that gender, playing into that gender, that's literally the point of genders, is it not?
But there are shared experiences among the gender, right, among women that trans women will never have, and vice versa, where women will never have the same trans experiences. Women will never know what it's like to grow up as a boy or go through puberty as a boy or anything like that. A trans woman will never know what it's like to go through puberty as a girl or grow up as a girl. Now, they can do things to be perceived as a girl, but that doesn't mean, or a woman, right? But that doesn't mean they are a woman. Now,
Okay.
I think that is like where we're running in circles. You can do things to be perceived as the opposite gender, but that doesn't mean you are the opposite gender.
Yeah, I understand that. But I mean, even in that line of thinking, which I don't necessarily agree with, there are women that don't experience a lot of the other things other women don't, and it doesn't make them any less women.
Those are anomalies. For example, the pregnancy one.
Wait, one quick second. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I heard your argument earlier, and I think it's kind of not okay to call people anomalies. Like women, I'm saying women have been able to, like women for centuries, I'm sure, have been born and not been able to have children. I wouldn't necessarily call them anomalies.
Yeah, no.
They're just different.
So you can call them whatever you want, right? But the train went off the railroad. On their road of kind of, how do I want to say this? Self-directed, growing and going through their biological railroad, something went off the line, so they couldn't give birth. So
I don't think that's necessarily true.
Yes, it's true, because if they go to the doctor and they say, hey, I'm having issues with getting pregnant, the doctor's not going to be like, well, too bad, that's normal. No, they're going to look for what went wrong or what happened to cause them to not give birth or be infertile. And then if they can fix it, they'll offer fertility drugs. There's a reason why we even have fertility drugs. Now,
they're going to say it's normal, because it is completely normal. There's thousands of women that can't have children.
Right? It does happen, but they're going to look for the reason why it happened in the first place, because it isn't normal.
But I'm saying, what does that mean, though? That means that
something went off the railroad for their track, right? Yeah, they're an anomaly. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And when it does happen,
it does happen often. It happens a lot, actually. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of women.
Right. And there's millions upon millions upon millions of women. So yeah, obviously there are going to be a lot of cases of where it happens, but that isn't, the route that every woman goes through.
Exactly.
Eventually it is where it ends up when they go through menopause and they can't give birth.
So to say that giving birth is the nature of a woman, not giving birth is also the nature of a woman.
No.
Because lots
of women
for centuries have not been able to have babies.
Right. Do you know what I mean when I say of the nature too? I'm not saying every woman has to. I'm saying, generally speaking, women can give birth. And
generally speaking, a lot of them cannot.
Okay, now we're playing with semantics, because yes.
No, I'm saying
say a lot is like 10, right? And I'm not saying that it's only 10. I'm just using this as an example, right? And then 10 out of 100 cannot give birth. That means something went wrong on that track. And a doctor can look to see what's going on to try to either provide answers, because they're not going to be like, well, you're just a woman, you just can't give birth. Like, no, that's not what's going to happen. The doctor's going to provide them with a diagnosis and be like, this is why it didn't work out for you.
Right. But you're saying nature.
To do the same thing, right? They're not of the nature to give birth. Trans women cannot give birth. So if they try to go to the doctor,
nature.
Right. Yes, because that is the nature of the female and woman.
But I'm saying I feel like you're using nature and natural and all these words, but it's very natural for a woman to not be able to have a child. That comes from nature. Women are born every single day, not being able to have children. It's natural. Right? It's nature. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you're trying to have all these qualities.
No, it is not.
Are these things that make
for women
trans women not women?
Right. There's a reason why we have a binary, because one can get pregnant and one cannot. of the nature to get pregnant means you can get pregnant. Obviously, there are exceptions to that rule. That does not mean that is the rule. That's my whole point I'm trying to make when I say anomalies, when I say they can go to the doctor and get a diagnosis. That's not saying they're any less of a woman. They're still of that nature. Just because something went wrong doesn't mean they're not a woman. Vice versa. A man cannot get pregnant. He is not of the nature to get pregnant. He is, however, of the nature to impregnate. So therefore, he can get someone pregnant. Now, if he can't, for some reason, something went wrong, then they're going to look at him. The doctors will be like, why aren't you fertile in a sense? Why aren't you, able to get someone pregnant? The doctors will take two different routes for both cases. Now, if we had someone who was able to get pregnant and also impregnate, that would be a whole different conversation, and we would be completely different. Like, this would be completely different.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like your argument is kind of like it doesn't make much sense because you're saying nature and natural, and women are literally born not able to have children. It's literally natural
to grow two arms when they're in the womb.
Say that again.
Are humans of the nature to have two arms, or do we get born with only one arm every 9 times out of 10?
I guess 9. I mean, I'm saying what my point is that I'm trying to make
the rule, and that's not how
it's works. Not. I'm saying you're trying to say that there's a rule. There's no rules. We're talking about people being born here. We're talking about sexes. There are multiple different sexes. People are born with different chromosomes. People are born not able to have children. You can't say that, oh, that's the rule, because most people, you're basically saying that trans women, wait 1 second, you're basically saying that trans women aren't women because they can't have children, or they're not of the nature to have children. But then there's literally women who can't have children, but I guess because they're of the nature, even though they're not, because they can't have children.
Because they're
it's natural for them to not have children, because plenty of other women don't have children.
I think that's where you're not connecting. When you find out you have if you're pregnant, right? Or if you
I get what you're saying. You're saying that you're diagnosing it as a disease or whatever.
You're going to have a baby girl and at 9 months, it's safe to assume that you're going to have a baby girl who will then also have grandkids and give birth.
But I'm saying that doesn't necessarily mean anything. That doesn't necessarily mean that she's an anomaly or she's not natural.
That's the objective truth you have to have. Otherwise, there's no difference between the sexes in the first
place. What do you mean? What objective truth?
That women are of the nature to give birth and men are of the nature to not get pregnant or impregnate. Like, that's the whole point. If it doesn't happen, that means there was an anomaly or something went off the railroad and they're trying to figure out why. If it was normal, they wouldn't be trying to figure out why it went off the railroad. That's the whole point. If it was the normal thing that happens, there would be no point in going to the doctor and being like, why can't I get pregnant? Or why can't I get my wife pregnant? Because I
get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, but I mean, it literally is normal. So to say that it's not normal is definitely normal. But just to go back to my point. Because I really don't even understand the whole of nature thing. Because again, nature, natural,
circling around.
It's natural for women to not be able to have kids.
So you're telling me like 50% of all women don't have kids or aren't able to give birth, essentially?
No, I mean it's a lot. I think it's literally like 1 in 15,000. Women literally are born with XY chromosomes, but present as females because of something in them that like they end up producing too much testosterone. And so even beyond that, there's still way more women that just can't have children, period. So it's not even rare for women to have XY chromosomes and still be seen as women and be born with. But anyway, I think we're just gonna have to agree to disagree. I feel like trans women are definitely women. I mean, going by the standards of gender, trans women definitely are women. We can argue all day and say that they aren't, but if we're going by the actual fields of science that have produced gender and study gender and what we go by gender today, trans women are definitely women. But It was nice talking to you.
Likewise. Take care. I don't know where that was getting lost in translation. Like I don't know where that kept getting lost in translation. Holy cow. All right, y'all. I know y'all want to next, but I'm tired. It's midnight. I have to wake up soon. So I'll do this again tomorrow at 7 or something. So if you want to be here for tomorrow's, there's some crazy things that go in. Follow or something. I don't really care.